Hi, I'm Daniel Gold, and welcome to the Gold Standard Leadership Lab. By day, I'm a partner at a leading advisory firm where I draw upon my background as an attorney to help my clients succeed. This podcast, though, is my personal project, completely separate and apart from my day job, but reflects the same passion that I exhibit everywhere for teaching, mentoring, and helping others succeed through simple, impactful lessons. It is my hope that you'll walk away with practical takeaways to help you on your leadership journey. Thanks for being a part of this community and for joining me in the Leadership Lab. Let's get started. What happens when travel interrupts your consistency pattern? Well, a vacation for me in Europe answered that question before I meant to even ask it. I was 7 hours ahead of Kansas City for the entire trip. And going over is actually the easy part. Your body barely fights you on the way out. But coming back, that's where it gets real. And I know that because, I track my Whoop data every single morning. I look at my recovery score, and the interesting thing is that recovery score after recovery score, I was getting red and yellow the entire week I got back. Why? My mind still thought I was 7 hours ahead. So I was waking up at 3:30 in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, and I could tell you, while I am an early riser, that was not by choice. So right as my recovery scores started climbing back toward green, I had to fly to New York for meetings, for work. So that's only an hour ahead, and on paper, that's nothing. My body was still mid-repair, though, from the first disruption, and now I was setting it back again before it finished healing. So I want you to sit with that for a second, because this is what a real week looks like for a lot of us leading teams. It's rarely one clean hit with recovery time built in after. It's a second hit landing before the first one even gets a chance to heal. But here's what got squeezed in the middle of all of it. My running took a hit. My strength training took a hit. Both things I know matter very, very much to me. And both things I could watch getting compressed in the data that was sitting right in front of me as well. So I had to ask myself the question this whole episode is built around. When everything in your system is compromised, I'm talking about sleep, energy, recovery, what is the one thing that you still keep? So for me, it's running. Coming back from Europe, I ran 3 miles and then 4. Building it back instead of expecting my normal pace to just be there. And when I got to New York, I found Central Park. I had to make a trip to New Jersey, and that's where I found a nature trail. So I ran 7 miles, and I felt like I was getting back to normal. So running is the thing I always keep. Running defines me. Running resets me, and that pull is strong enough to get me out of the door, even on the mornings when jet lag makes everything else feel impossible. And so that's what this episode is really all about. Consistency is a muscle, and it's one of the most underrated tools that we have as leaders. I feel like that's so important that I want to say it again. Consistency is a muscle, and it is an underrated tool as a leader. It's underrated for the same reason that eating well and sleeping on time are equally underrated. Neither one announces itself. Nobody claps for a decision you didn't have to make because you'd already turned into a habit. So here's my thesis for all of you for this episode. Consistency is the muscle that connects 4 different domains in your life: physical, spiritual, emotional, and intellectual. If you train that muscle in one domain and it doesn't stay contained there, it shows up in the other 3, whether you're paying attention to it or not. Okay, so for example, let's go through this. Running survived that trip while other things did not. And the reason is that 2 completely different mechanisms hide under the single word consistency. And most people only ever build on one of them. The first one is called elimination. What does this mean? This means that removing a decision before it has the chance to drain you. So let's talk about a very good example. I've worn a black button-down shirt like this one to work for years now. I own 7 of the exact same black shirts, and they all hang in my closet. Every morning, I don't have to stand in front of my closet negotiating with myself about what to wear. I lay my clothes out the night before for the same exact reason. It protects the small amount of mental bandwidth I have before the sun comes up, because I already know what the rest of the day is going to ask of me. So think about how many decisions you're making as a leader in a single day. There are dozens of small decisions that we're making, and there's maybe one or two heavy ones. Meetings pile on top of emails, emails pile on top of messages, and by the afternoon, there's nothing left in the tank. That reminds me of when our children were much, much younger, and my wife used to joke that she was out of popsicle sticks. What did that mean? It meant that she made every decision that she had available for the day, and there just wasn't any more to give. I think about that line a lot now, because specifically as a leader, because if a parent can run out of the capacity to decide what snack to hand a 5-year-old, a leader can run out of the capacity to make a good call at 4 o'clock in the afternoon after a full day of back-to-back meetings. In other words, the black shirt is one small piece of armor against that. It's elimination. It is subtraction. Okay, so what is the second mechanism? The second mechanism is construction. Well, this is obviously the opposite move. So instead of removing friction, you are actually building it on purpose. Think about that. The run before the sun comes up, the one that you don't want to do, that's construction. You're spending bandwidth on purpose there because the friction itself is what builds the capacity. You know, one day, years into wearing the same exact black shirt, I wore pink instead on an all hands call. And I literally threw people off. They were talking about it on Teams messages. People noticed. People asked questions. People reacted to a shirt color like something was actually wrong with me that day. And that told me something interesting. Consistency isn't only a tool for managing your own bandwidth. It's also a signal to the people around you. You show up the same way every day and you're communicating something to your team without saying a word. That today is a normal day. That nothing has shifted. That you can read you accurately because you're predictable. If you break the pattern, even in something as small as the color of a shirt, people notice the gap before they notice the reason behind it. Now, a hard habit becomes an easy one through repetition until the decision disappears entirely. If you think about something silly like brushing your teeth, when you were a kid, someone had to remind you, maybe even stand over you while you did it. It took effort. It took negotiation. Now you don't think about it at all. It just happens. And that's the entire idea behind really great books I've read before, like Atomic Habits, another book called Tiny Habits. That basically the thesis is a behavior repeated through enough times, enough repetition, it stops costing you willpower and it just becomes automatic. So apply that to me with running. The sunrise run that started as construction, the one that required talking myself into it every single morning, doesn't require that negotiation anymore. The miles still feel exactly as hard as they always did, but what changed was the decision. The decision to do it stopped requiring a fight at all. And there is the real promise of consistency. It is a conversion process. Because if you do the hard thing enough times and it stops requiring the fight it used to require, it frees up bandwidth for the next hard thing that you actually need to build. Now, one of my favorite podcasts in the world is Dr. Andrew Huberman. The reason why I like Dr. Andrew Huberman so much is because he talks about neuroscience. I'm fascinated by the way the brain works, the way the brain operates. And I referenced a lot of the neuroscience across the Gold Standard Leadership Lab podcasts because he takes a complicated topic like neuroscience and breaks it down into plain English so all of us can understand it and all of us can learn from it. And what I love to do is to be able to apply neuroscience to leadership because it just makes a lot of sense to talk about it in that capacity. So if you go back in a lot of the 70 plus episodes that we've done here on the Gold Standard Leadership Lab, you'll be able to pick up patterns where I talk about the neuroscience. So the reason why I bring this up is because Dr. Huberman had an episode people call the Dopamine Masterclass. Now, in it, he makes a case that most of us actually get backwards. We assume that the reward comes at the end. So call it the finish line of the marathon or the goal that you had at work. Basically, the moment that you're done. Huberman argues you can train your brain to release dopamine from the friction and the challenge itself during the effort, not only once you've crossed the finish line. And that is a learnable skill, not just a fixed trait. There's another episode related that Dr. Huberman did with David Goggins where he gets specific about the mechanism. He names the mid-cingulate cortex. He names the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. Now, that mouthful, the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, is a part of the brain that releases dopamine in response to friction and pain. And he's clear that this response is learned. So people who repeatedly choose hard things over easy ones train that structure to respond more strongly over time. That's not a personality trait some people are born with and others aren't. It's a muscle. It's the most literal sense the brain allows for. So when I call consistency a muscle, I'm not reaching for a nice sounding phrase. There's structure in your brain that gets stronger every time you choose the hard thing on purpose. I've also talked before on the show about what I call your private anchor. So the private anchor is the one thing that holds when everything else in your system bends under pressure. There was an episode that I did a few weeks back that talked about this fact about when the system breaks, maybe the journaling slips, the meditation slips, the food tracking slips. There's usually one thing underneath all of it that stays. This episode asks the harder version of that same question. What happens when the disruption doesn't just bend the structure around your anchor? What happens when it goes straight at the anchor itself? Jet lag doesn't touch a journaling practice the way it touches your ability to physically get out the door and run. That trip was a direct hit on the one thing I'd built my strongest consistency around. What held was a smaller version, 3 miles instead of 7, and that smaller version still counted as keeping it. Consistency shows up in the 4 domains: physical, spiritual, emotional, intellectual. So let's go over those because we referenced it before. So the first one, physical, means running, strength training, sleep. And the protocol here is really simple. You lay out tomorrow's clothes and workout gear tonight. You remove the decision before your bandwidth runs out. The second one's spiritual. Now, that may mean religion for you, or it might mean meditation the way it does for me. The protocol is picking one fixed time, the same time daily, with no negotiation about when. Third, emotional. So this could be breathwork exercises. It could be gratitude journaling, regulating how you're feeling instead of pushing through the day numb to it. Attach one gratitude line or maybe 3 minutes of breath work to a trigger you already have, maybe right after you close your laptop for the day. The fourth domain, intellectual, that may mean reading a book. Now, if you're like me, you might say, well, I don't really have time to read a whole book. That's fair. But what about just 20 pages in a day before you check your phone first thing in the morning? If you think about it, 20 pages a day. Think about how many books you can read over the course of a year. By the time you're done reading 20 pages a day, every single day, 365 days a year, well, that's a stack of books that most people say, well, I don't have enough time to read. So 4 domains, 1 muscle. If you train it anywhere, it strengthens everywhere, right? If you train it anywhere, it strengthens everywhere. You know what you really keep by checking data? Not memory, right? Here's what I want you to do. I want you to check your data, not your memory here. I want you to pull up your calendar or your notes from the last time real life hit you. Maybe it was a bad travel week, a sick kid, a stretch where everything felt like it was against you. Check what you did that week, day by day, against what you planned. Again, not memory. You're looking at your calendar because that's data sitting there. the kind you can't talk yourself out of. And whatever you find still standing in the middle of all that wreckage, right there, that's your anchor. Not the one you'd guess sitting here comfortable listening to me right now. And I want you to sit with this a little bit longer than feels comfortable. What's the one thing you keep? Now, give yourself the real answer, not the polished version that sounds good on a leadership podcast. I mean, the thing that survives when your sleep is wrecked, your schedule is wrecked, and every excuse in the world is sitting right there for you to use. That answer tells you something about who you are underneath the roles that you play. It tells you what you hold on to when everything else collapses. Now, this question belongs in a book about eulogies. Why? Because nobody stands up at a funeral and reads your job title or your org chart. What gets said is what got kept. Now, that's the same question sitting underneath the book I'm writing called The Eulogy You Haven't Written Yet. I think about the 3 miles in Central Park and then the trail in New Jersey when I write that book because those aren't side stories. That's the material the book is built from. So what is yours? And remember, leadership isn't about perfection. It is about progress. So take this lesson, put it into action, and continue setting the gold standard in your own life and at work. I'll see you all next time.